Hello and good day, everyone. My name is Andy Cervantes, and I'll be talking about the product liability. From product liability, the agenda in particular we'll be speaking about is theories of product liability, requirements of strict product liability, and defense product liability, and finally the conclusion. Theories of product liability. One of the theories of product liability is negligence, and from negligence, it can be from exercise due care, which is if a manufacturer fails to exercise due care, the person who was injured from the product can then sue for negligence. This is extended to all areas like product material, production process, etc. Along with that is privity of contract. Privity of contract is a contractual relationship between parties involved. Individuals outside the contract do not need to have like the privy to sue, meaning that if an individual was injured, by a defective product will not the one who purchased the product can still sue for negligence. And then finally, you have cause in fact, which is a legal term to explain the defendant's actions that led towards the plaintiff's harm, but must be proven by the but for, meaning that the injury wouldn't have happened without the defendant's actions. One of the other theories of product liability is misrepresentation, which can also involve tort of fraud, which is the basis of liability in civil cases, mainly involving intentional misrepresentation of a service or product from the defendant that led to the harm of the plaintiff. But also, as well, there also must be a material of fact, which is like the seller had intended to use the buyer's reliance of the misrepresentation of the label or advertisement of the buyer must have relied on the misrepresentation. The next section in particular is the requirements of strict product liability. A portion regarding strict product liability is also proving a defective condition, which is like for example, like a product which will require a plaintiff to prove that the product was defective when sold or leased from the defendant. If not proven, the plaintiff will not succeed. But also with that is design defects, which can play a factor if there was alternative safe design available, but just not chosen, which then, of course, the defendant can be held liable. But also after that is inadequate warnings, which can play a role in deeming something defective, especially if harm could be reduced by a reasonable instruction/warnings by the seller. But the seller has to warn the user of the harm if the product was misused. Another section of the strict product liability is the proximity, no change, and extension. For the proximity, for example, like proximate cause, is when the defective product was like the actual thing that caused the damage received. But for like the no change to product in particular, which means that the product must not be substantially changed from when it was sold prior to like the damage or injury occurring. But also finally is the extension of liability, which means that courts can extend strict liability to injured bystanders, which can sue manufacturers for liability, even if they weren't like exactly the ones directly like injured from it, but they're the ones who also receive compensation in return. The last major section is defense to product liability. Preemption and assumption of risk. Preemption, for example, like government regulation, which government regulation preempts claims for product liability, which means that the plaintiff is unable to sue due to the regulations or red tape involved. And then another thing as well, you also have assumed responsibility, which is the assumption of risk involving two factors. The plaintiff knew that about the risk created by the product and voluntarily accepted the risk by agreeing on some form, whether on paper or by word. The next section is then misuse, negligence, and known dangers. Like, for example, product misuse, which is similar to assumptions of risk, happens if a product is not used as if it was intended. Another thing as well is comparative negligence. While not being able to completely remove liability, it can help reduce total damages awarded if the plaintiff is found also at fault from the misuse. But another thing as well is the commonly known dangers portion, which is associated for like a specific product, like for example, like a lighter or a knife, which can help the defendant from not being liable from something that's widely and publicly known that, hey, this is actually a dangerous thing. The next section is then knowledgeable users and statute of limitations, such as a portion of known dangers by the user. Like if dangers like a burn from a lighter, that people would know what happened using a lighter and may not warrant the warning to these users regarding the danger. And then you have statute of repose, which places like a type of time limit on the product liability action like to file a claim within the few years of the date of sale and/or manufacture. In conclusion, just different product liabilities along with the different liabilities of product itself, which is just different portions that you can use of along the different defenses of the liabilities, such as what we mentioned earlier. Thank you. And here are the references if need be.